for Niagara Falls.
Well, thank you, Madam Speaker. Thank you to my colleagues. Madam Speaker, I rise today to talk about Bill C-46, an act to amend the criminal code offences relating to conveyances and make subsequent consequential amendments to other acts. There's a couple of things that I'm going to address, Madam Speaker, today on this, and one of them is the timetable for this bill and the bill for C-45. I think the government is making a mistake, quite frankly. First of all, even bringing in the marijuana bill, but that being said, pushing it forward to try and get it in by Canada Day of next year. And even though I've heard the minister say that they're going to try and push this bill that is in conjunction with C-45, try to push it through, I think the whole thing is a mistake. We heard considerable testimony from different groups that they thought that this was being jammed through too quickly. The Canadian Police Services asked that the legislation be delayed so that they would have the ability to train and put resources in place. I would suggest that the government has not done enough to put effective educational campaigns in place, despite statistics showing that the significant increases in fatalities due to drug-impaired driving. That we've got a problem already with drug-impaired driving here. That somehow the Liberals tell us by legalizing this that somehow they've come up with some solutions to this. It's the exact opposite. Mandatory roadside testing, in addition to the large numbers of officers who still don't have sufficient training to adequately detect drug-impaired driving through drug recognition training, is another problem, a part of this. And the refusal of the government to mandate proper storage restrictions of cannabis plants in the home. The government, with all, due its excitement, were pleased to announce that everyone was going to be able to have a small grow-op in the kitchen. We were very much against this, just for the reasons that I've stated at committee and before this, that how can you make it any more accessible, easier for kids to get at if you've got plants in the kitchen? I thought I got some good news a couple of weeks ago. The woman in my office, Sherry, said, you'll be interested to know they've made some changes about the grow-ops in the kitchen. I said, dear, that's wonderful. That's great. They've been listening to us. Well, yeah, they said the 3 feet isn't high enough. They've got to, they've got to let them grow taller than that. You see, so after getting criticism about this, they do the exact opposite. Say, well, geez, we better let these people have 4 and 5 or 10-foot plants. You know what I mean? Just there are more joints, I guess, available if the higher these things grow. This is a huge mistake, and one that we will be hearing about in the future when if this bill gets passed. Madam Speaker, Canadian police services from across the country have called on the government again to delay this legislation beyond the 2018 to allow law enforcement time to properly manage the threat of increased drug-impaired driving and the association that that's going to take place with the legalization of marijuana. They said, the Canadian Police Services stated that there is a zero chance that they will be ready by July 2018. Zero chance, Madam Speaker. So why is it that the Liberals are so intent on not listening to Canada's law enforcement? They've imposed this deadline, again, with little regard to the health and safety of Canadians, that I would suggest. During the recent meetings that our committees have had, the Canadian Association of Police Chiefs warned that they needed, again, more time to train officers under the new law and more than double the number of police officers who are certified to conduct roadside drug-impaired testing. They also called for more time to implement public education. Officials, if you just have a look around us, officials in Washington State and Colorado have stressed the importance of implementing educational campaigns to deter the public from drug-impaired driving to as soon as possible and long before legalization. The timetable by the government is just too tight. They say they're going to get C-46 in before C-45. again, I still, with the timetable that they've insisted upon for C-45, we are not going to be ready. Now, the Liberals have not taken the advice of members of the Police Association. There are Canadian premiers that have voiced their concerns. The provincial governments need more time to get their rules and regulations in place. The minister mentioned MAD Canada. They've also called for the government to ensure the legislative framework is in place under the Motor Vehicle Act, giving police the powers to lay drug-impaired charges. Currently, the standard breathalyzer will not detect drugs. I mean, one of the things that we did hear about, and some of my colleagues mentioned, is how challenging this is to exactly measure the level of THC and to get that to measure the level of impairment. And it gets further complicated now that we are encouraging people to smoke marijuana and the combination of marijuana and alcohol. This is going to become more complicated, and that's one of the things that became very, very clear on the hearings that we had or the testimony we had at C-46, how difficult this is. We had different experts say that, the THC levels can be in your system here for days afterwards. There's a spike, when you have the first couple of joints, but then it goes down, but how quickly it goes down, and then what does that do in combination with alcohol? So, Madam Speaker, again, we have to have people who are expert in this area, and the police services have said they've got to have at least 2,000 experts that are needed to be able to do this. And I will quote Ms. McCaskill from Mothers Against Drunk Driving, saying that if every officer can have a disposable saliva test in their vehicle, it will certainly have a positive impact on road safety. Unfortunately, the government is not in a position to guarantee that those drug experts will be in place. They have not made the necessary provisions to make this happen. Again, they're focused on getting this through, that somehow this is going to be a wonderful thing on the next Canada Day. Everybody can be out smoking a joint, but again,
don't be on the roads.
Yeah, that's right. Again, this has been a huge mistake. I have to mention as well the whole question of the penalties in there. That, Madam Speaker, our party is very clear that if you get a $1,000 fine if you kill somebody because of your drunk driving, that is unacceptable, and it sends the wrong message, quite frankly. Sure. And the Mothers for Justice that my colleague talked about, that were very clear about that it's not enough to say, well, the person got arrested. Well, we want to send out a message, a very clear message, that if you are drunk and you start driving and you start killing people, that there are serious consequences. Not a $1,000 fine, not $1,500 here, not a slap on the wrist. Our job is to make sure people get that message, that people have to take responsibility for the crimes that they have committed. And that's been something consistent that when we were in government we had. There has to be serious consequences for people who commit serious crimes and victimize other people. So we know, Madam Speaker, that the statistics show us that impaired driving due to drugs is on the rise. And this, again, is why we have to have a nationwide public education. We know, for instance, just having a look at Washington State, what's going to happen in this country. Fatal crashes among drivers who tested positive for marijuana went up from 8% in 2013 to 17% in 2014. And in Colorado, the number of drivers in fatal crashes who tested positive for marijuana without other drugs in their system between 2005 and 2014 went from 3.4% to 12%. It went by 4 times. It multiplied when they started legalizing marijuana in that state. Now, Dr. Mark Ware, co-chair of Ottawa's Marijuana Task Force, stated that Canada should immediately boost spending on intensive public education and research into the impacts of marijuana and not wait until 2018 or not be, and I would go beyond that and say not be forced into this, having to be, this all be put in place by next Canada Day. Dr. Ware told a drug policy conference in Ottawa that a bill to overhaul Canada's marijuana is the first step in what he predicts will be an unbelievably deep and tangled web with the province's territories and the municipalities who will be responsible for much of this scheme. I got to tell you, Madam Speaker, here's what's going to happen when this thing gets enacted. The Liberals, the federal Liberals, they'll be blaming the provinces. When this thing is a complete national mess, they'll say, well, we legalized it, the provinces, that's your responsibility. That's what they will be saying. They'll be pointing the finger, it's not them. Once they get this off their hands, then, hey, it's the provinces, it's the police services, the police, you know, the police are screwing this up here. They're not doing enough. This. And that's what is so unfortunate about this. They've been clearly warned, this government has been warned about the implications of legalizing marijuana, that they required safeguards that should be in place. The Canadian Automobile Association has made the case that a public education campaign has to be put in place. Madam Speaker, this is going to complicate our judicial system. It was made very clear that there will be challenges, charter challenges, and I understand, Madam Speaker, whenever you put in new legislation, there's always the possibility that people can challenge this. But nonetheless, there are going to be a lot of cases, and compounding the challenge that this will have with the courts is something that we have raised with the government on many occasions, is to make sure there are enough judges get appointed. This has been a very slow process by this government, and all I can say to them is it's not going to help the situation when these cases are all in before the courts, and there are delays in court cases, etc. It doesn't help it if the government of Canada isn't moving forward as expeditiously as possible with appointing judges. The other thing we have to worry about, Madam Speaker, is not just the people smoking marijuana, it's the people who will be turning this into edibles. I can see, and I know what the Liberals will say. Well, that's the provinces. They're to blame if this is the case. I understand that. I understand that. But Madam Speaker, we all have a responsibility. And when these things get turned into edibles, when children have access, and again, not all children will go after the pot plants in the kitchen. I appreciate that, and nor should they. But the edibles, this is going to be another danger to the young people in our country, and one that the government does not seem to take with the seriousness with which it needs. So, Madam Speaker, when I had a look at the legislation that was before Parliament, there were sections that I did like. The minister talked about the one section there that taking the marijuana tests about 2 hours afterwards, that I believe, among other things, it will go after those individuals who try to avoid an impaired driving charge by having a couple of drinks after the accident, and the excuse they use is they needed a couple of drinks after the accident to try and calm down. And well, we all know that this is a way of avoiding or complicating an impaired driving charge, and that's one of the sections I actually agree with. But when my colleague, the member from St. Albert Edmonton, came forward with a group of reasonable amendments to ensure that people live up to the responsibilities that they have when they have found that or finally get convicted of impaired driving, and impaired driving killings somebody, those penalties were completely rejected by the Liberals. And I can say to them that when people come forward and they say, somebody killed my child, they got a $1,500 fine, guess what? The whole system, the justice system is compromised, It decreases people's confidence in the criminal justice system when people aren't given penalties that are commensurate with the crimes that they have committed. Now, my colleagues in the Liberals say, well, you know, we don't want to put these tough penalties here because that's not going to stop people from committing these crimes. Well, I think it does send out a message to people that if there are serious consequences for what you are doing, yes, there are people who say, okay, we better be careful with this because there are serious consequences by reason of their impaired driving. So I would say to the government, this C-45 and C-46, I appreciate they go together, and one is the second one is to complement the first one, but I wish, and my colleagues have said the same thing, would they reconsider everything about this, the implementation, the whole question of legalizing marijuana and what this is going to do to our children. And I can promise you, Madam Speaker, that if this gets implemented by this government and they start to run away from it and just say, well, I don't know, you better talk to the education department, you better talk to the police, you better talk to the provinces, we on this side are going to hold them accountable for everything, the whole complete mess that this is going to create. We will not let them off the hook by pointing at somebody else. So, Madam Speaker, I appreciate the opportunity to make comments on this, and again, I hope the government hasn't listened to us up at this point, but I hope they will in the future. Thank you.
Questions and comments? The honourable member for Oakville.